Hi, the Mudbrooker here. This is the third video in my series on restoring my old cook stove, and I'm going to show you what I've been up to on this for the past week. But first, I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon: Case Kist, Benedict Riggers, Joy Jones, Damian Bamer, Leo, Theodore Engelke, Valentin Toman, Rudy Valvano, and Kiosby. And seeing as how it's been snowing off and on all day, it does that in the middle of October sometimes in Wisconsin, I think a nice glass of grog is in order. Here's to you guys, and thank you much for your continued support. Anyway, I've had some questions about restoring stoves from various viewers, and the first one asked if they can use the same stuff that is used to refinish cast iron clawfoot bathtubs on a cook stove. The stuff that they use on bathtubs is actually an epoxy. It's not a true enamel. A true enamel is powdered glass mixed with pigments, various binding agents, and usually water into something like a paint, which is then applied to the steel and fired in a kiln at a very high temperature until the glass melts and fuses to the steel. And this gives it tremendous heat and rust resistance. An epoxy doesn't have nearly as high of a temperature tolerance as a true enamel does, but you could probably use it on things like the warming oven or the reservoir because they don't get very hot. But once you get closer and closer to the firebox, it'll probably burn off. So another alternative might be powder coating, but I don't really know what the temperature ranges are possible with different powder coats, so you would have to check with a powder coating company to see if that would actually work. Another viewer asked, they were looking at a stove and there was a crack in the back. They weren't really specific as to where, and they were wondering what the best way to fix it is. There's two main ways of fixing cast iron. You can either braze it, which is basically melting brass onto hot iron like solder, or you can weld it. I'll go into more detail about both processes when I fix that part for the inside of the firebox, but it mostly depends on whether or not it's someplace it's going to show. You can't really hide something that's been brazed and it leaves, a big bead of brass where you put it on and it's really obvious. Welding, you can build the weld up and grind it down smooth to where it's practically, if not entirely, invisible. So, it kind of depends on what it is and where it is, whether or not you want to weld it or braze it. The last question was about the age of this stove, and I'll show you that when I get down to the oven and show you my repairs on the oven, because there is a pretty good clue as to exactly how old this stove is. So, I'm going to leave that here and get back to fixing my stove. So I was out scrounging around looking for some sheet metal, decent sheet metal anyway, to build up a new ash pan. And I searched and looked and wandered all around when I came across this. That's a little cheap toolbox. Turns out, if I can hold it one-handed, that is almost ideal for an ash pan. How about that, eh? It's a little bit short, but what I'm going to do is, let me get this out a little bit. What I'm going to do is zip down along the hinge, cut that open, take the top off, because I'll have to take the top off regardless, cut a couple of strips of metal off the top, and build up the sides a little higher. It's also just a shade narrower than the original ash pan, so I might have to add a couple little tabs on the end to meet up the screws that go in the back of the frame for the front of the ash pan. So what I'm going to do now is go outside, cut this up, get my pieces all cut, then I'll come back in and show you putting them together. I have all my pieces cut out, and what I did is I left the remnant of the hinge on the edge of this piece So when I rivet this on, it'll reinforce that side a little bit and stiffen it up. And I did the same thing on the other side, left a piece of hinge there for when I put that piece on. I also cut a couple of end pieces with a slight taper to them because this is about a ½ inch narrower than it needs to be. So by tapering it, by flaring the top out a little bit, I can make it wide enough without having to monkey around trying to widen out the entire box. And it should work out pretty good. One thing I did notice though is I should have checked my rivet supply before I went to town. I have enough to get a good start on this, but the ones I have are way too long for what I need. So what I'm going to do is just put a few rivets in to get this put together and fit it up right. And next time I'm in town, I'll get some of the right size ones and rivet everything out good and solid. And then tomorrow, when it quits raining and the sun is out, I'll take this outside and I'll burn all this paint off of here with a propane torch, because I don't need this smoking and stinking forever and ever when I'm using it. So I'm going to get on with measuring this up and putting some rivets in it. Okay, I'll get my camera off the stand and we'll have a look, give this a little test fit. I'll have to do a little bit of bending and forming on this once I get everything all riveted out, but I think this is going to work. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's see if this thing's actually going to fit. You betcha. That really saved me a lot of messing around. I don't have a sheet metal brake for bending sheet metal, and I could have done it, but it would have been a lot of screwing around trying to get it to work out right. And this saved a lot of time. So I'll get the right rivets for it, get everything burned off of there, put the face on, and I'll have myself a shiny new ash pan that'll last for at least a little while. Okay, I have the paint all off my old toolbox. Got the sides all riveted on, the ends all riveted on, and I mounted a little flat spring on the end. You might be wondering why you'd need a flat spring on your ash pan. Well, most people wouldn't. But this hole right here is stripped out and I don't have any way of retapping it. I would need a set of bottoming taps to get in there because it's a pretty shallow hole, and I don't have any. The only other option would be to drill it all the way through, and I don't want to do that. You can see there's another screw and a little tab of metal that holds that panel in the middle of the frame. So what I'm going to do is put that spring on there, and that'll push against the back of this and hold the front out where it belongs. All I got to do now is screw my face on. I'm going to use a little bit of never seize on the screws so that they come out again, because eventually I'm going to replace this. I have other plans, but this will be more than serviceable for as long as I feel like using it. Let me grab my camera. Off of the stand. Look at that. Boingy, boingy, boingy. Never see that. But there you go, an ash pan. I decided that I would fix the inside, fix those grates after all, so that they moved freely. I took a angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, and I just barely trimmed the ends of these grates off as little as I possibly could, because I don't like removing metal unless I absolutely have to, but they now work freely. You'll notice I still haven't put the pieces back on the inside, and that's because I still have to fix that piece in the middle that goes right there. But that's all ready to go pretty much, apart from that one piece. I'll come down here to the oven, get myself down where we can see good. Somebody asked about the age of the oven, and hopefully this is coming through good on my camera. But you see right here it says patented October 24th, 1922. So this was made sometime after October 24th, 1922. Most likely in the 20s or 30s is my guess. I had a little bit of work to do inside the oven. First of all, both of these hinges are broken. This here is missing a piece, which I may or may not still have floating around here somewhere. But fixing the hinges isn't really a high priority, especially because on this hinge, underneath here on the end of the little arm, the little bar that holds it into the hinge, there's sort of a cam type deal that engages that mechanism inside that I showed you earlier with the spring on it. And that'd be a real pain to try and fix that right. But the problem was, when you open the oven door, there was nothing to really hold it up, and it could come down to more than 90 degrees, which put more strain on these hinges. So what I did is took some plumber's chain on both sides and connected it to the door and to the inside of the oven, and that does a nice job of holding the oven door up. And they're short enough so that when I close the door, they don't get caught in anything or interfere. So that works out pretty slick. I scrubbed out the inside of the oven, but it still needs a good cleaning before I actually use it. And I got to clean up that rack. That's pretty rusty yet. I had to put a couple of bolts in. Get my light pointed back there. Had to put a couple bolts in to hold up that rail in the back. But other than that, the oven was pretty much nothing to do on it. Like I said, I still have to build that. I still have to fix that piece for the inside of the firebox. And I hung up some of my cast iron pans on the wall. I got a lot more to go. But once I get that piece made for the firebox, mechanically speaking, this is pretty much ready to go. But next week I have to work on my chimney. I'm going to put a new clean-out door in the bottom, and the sleeve where the stovepipe goes into the chimney needs to be replaced. It's not really a big job, but it has to be done before I go and fire this up. So next week I should have everything done, and I'll be ready to test fire this in a following video. Thank you much for watching. We'll see you then.